Hey everyone, so I'm here to tell you a few things about what's going on in Venezuela. It's a pretty bad situation down there. I'll start by saying that government spending on social programs increased from 28% of GDP in 2000 to 40% of GDP in 2013. Nicolas Maduro raised the minimum wage 6 times in 2018, and he's done it a total of 26 times since he came to power in 2013. And the last raise in December puts the minimum wage at about $9.50 a month. By 2006, there were about 100,000 cooperatives employing over 700,000 people, and many of these co-ops were taken over by an unqualified political cronies. Government overspending created destructive deficits that caused massive problems when oil prices dropped. One of the government solutions was to print money, which worsened inflation. Inflation then led to price controls, which caused severe shortages. The reason the price controls cause severe shortages is because if you're a business, you're making a product, and Chavez tells you can only sell it for this amount, but inflation keeps raising the costs of the goods to make those products. Eventually it's going to cost more to make the product than you're allowed to sell it for, and you go out of business. This then led to massive protests, and then repression, and then destruction of democracy. This in turn all led to starvation, severe shortages of medicine, an increase in crime, and a huge refugee crisis. Children are dying in massive numbers due to starvation. The government kept secret how many people were dying of malnutrition and starvation. Hospital emergency rooms are overflowing, and this was unheard of 5 years ago. Parents are even going days without eating so their kids can have a little more to eat. Boys leave the home and join street gangs to fight for food scraps, and a lot of them die in the process. They get stabbed or shot, but they say they prefer to live on the streets with gangs because they have a chance to eat something. Crowds of adults storm dumpsters behind restaurants after they close at night to try and find some food scraps. And babies are dying because there's no baby formula anywhere, and mothers are sometimes too weak to breastfeed. A doctor named Dr. Milagos with Children's Hospital said he's had babies die in his arms of dehydration. The Venezuelan government has enforced a blackout on health statistics and have created an atmosphere where doctors are afraid to report or register cases. The statistics that do exist are pretty scary. In 2012, the mortality rate for children was 0.02%, and in 2015, 3 years later, it was just over 2%. That's an increased mortality rate of 100 times. In 2016, 11,446 children died under the age of 1, a 30% increase over 2015. In some public hospitals, the clinical diagnosis of malnutrition has been prohibited. In 2017, one university hospital requested 193 medications from the government agency that distributes them, and they only got 3 of those 193 medications. Nurses send parents of patients to pharmacies to try and buy supplies that they don't have at the hospitals. Parents substitute baby formula with whole milk, cream of rice, and water mixed with barley, and a lot of times this makes the babies sick and leads to their death. Some families go 4 or 5 days on just water. 9 out of 10 households say they don't have enough money to buy food, and 2/3 go to sleep hungry at night. The Catholic nonprofit named Caritas said that a family would need 98 times the minimum wage to afford a basic food supply. Since the late 1990s, food and other goods and utilities were subsidized by the state, thanks to massive oil revenues. After the price collapse in 2014, the price controls remained, and this made the goods cheaper than it costs to produce them. The plummeting value of the bolivar has made it impossible for companies or the government to import goods, and the widespread crime wave has led to an average of 73 deaths per day in the country from crime. One couple was earning several $1,000s a month in 1999 when Hugo Chavez took power, and by 2016 that was down to about $2 a day, which is about $60 a month. According to Daniel D. Martino of the Manhattan Institute, three main policies implemented by Hugo Chavez since 1999 led to the current crisis. One is widespread nationalization of private industry, two is the currency and price controls, and then three is the irresponsible expansion of welfare programs. Chavez's first move was in the agricultural industry when he stole over 6 million hectares of land from rich landowners to give it to the poor workers over the course of many years. Daniel Martino said nationalism destroyed production in affected industries because no government has the capacity to run thousands of businesses or the profit motive to run them efficiently. Instead, government officials face incentives to please voters by selling products at low prices and hiring more employees than necessary, even when it's the wrong decision. As a result, Venezuela's food production fell 75% in 2 decades, while at the same time the population grew 33%. The dictators also nationalized electricity, water, oil, banks, supermarkets, construction, and more. In these sectors, the government increased payrolls and gave away products at low cost, which resulted in widespread blackouts, water shortages, falling oil production, and bankrupt government enterprises. In 2003, Chavez began to control the currency by setting an overvalued exchange rate between the bolivar and the US dollar. The regime had to ration available US dollars to importers. Since an overvalued exchange rate, there was more demand for US dollars than supply. The corrupt usually received most of the dollars, which led to huge profits. By the end of 2017, the economy was 23% smaller than in 2013, and inflation was over 1,600% in 2017. 3/4 of the population of Venezuela lost body weight in 2017 because they're hungry and don't have enough to eat. Back to the inflation. Inflation by last year was about 200,000%. An article written by Rebecca Nelson named Venezuela's Economic Crisis. She said between 2013 and 2017 the economy shrunk, it contracted by 35%, which is larger than the US contraction of the economy during the Great Depression. So their economy is shrinking faster than the US economy did during the Great Depression. Oil makes up 90% of exports, and oil sales fund the government budget. Oil exports also provide the foreign exchange Venezuela needs to import goods. Well, the GDP in 1980 per capita was $18,000. Now it's about $12,000. Should be going in the opposite direction. Oil was $10 a barrel when Chavez came to power in 1999, and it reached a peak of $145 in July of 2008. Between 1999 and 2015, the Venezuelan government earned more than $900 billion from oil exports. Half of that was during Chavez's second term in 2007 to 2012. President Chavez used this money excessively on social programs and to expand subsidies for food and energy. Social spending as a share of GDP rose from 28% in 2000 to 40% in 2013. Chavez borrowed heavily against future oil exports, running deficits in 9 of the 14 years he was in power. Venezuela's public debt more than doubled between 2000 and 2012. And the percentage of the debt to GDP rose from 28% to 58%. Chavez used oil to expand influence abroad. He started a program called Petro-Caribe, which allowed Caribbean countries to purchase oil at below market prices. The Chavez government also practiced widespread expropriations and nationalizations, with the number of private companies dropping from 14,000 in 1998 to 9,000 in 2011. Poverty rates went down from 37% in 2005 to 25% in 2012. But then government spending was not directed towards investment that could have led to an increase in economic activity and productivity, which could have led to a reduction in the country's reliance on oil. Expropriations and nationalizations discouraged foreign investment that could have provided the country with increased expertise and capital. Chavez did not use the boom years to build a rainy day fund and save up money, such as Citgo is the name of a subsidiary of the Venezuelan state oil company. That company is called Petróleos de Venezuela S.A. It's also known as PDVSA. That's the state oil company. Maduro, until recently, was committed to servicing the country's debt for fear of its overseas access being seized, like Citgo, the subsidiary. Also, he was afraid of oil shipments and cash payments for oil being seized. This commitment to servicing debt came at a huge expense to the country. The government tightened restrictions on access to foreign currency. It imposed price controls and cut imports. Imports fell from $62.9 billion in 2013 to $21.4 billion in 2016. Again, in 3 years' time, imports were cut by 2/3. Venezuela is dependent on these imports for most consumer goods, so these imports led to severe shortages of food and medicine. Venezuela got loans from Russia and China for future oil deliveries. In May of 2017, or actually in November of 2017, Maduro announced the country would refinance and restructure its debt. The government and the state-owned oil company, PDVSA, missed some loan payments on their bonds, or I should say they missed interest payments on their bonds in mid-November, and then the credit agencies issued default notices. From 2013 to 2016, commodity imports to the U.S. from Venezuela fell by 2/3, from $32 billion to $10 billion. In 2016, the USA was Venezuela's largest trading partner, 22% of the country's exports and 26% of their imports. 95% of what the U.S. imported in Venezuela was oil. Venezuela was the third largest source of crude oil imports for U.S. behind Canada and Saudi Arabia. More than 500 U.S. companies were represented in Venezuela, but with the current chaos, many have either left or restricted subsidiaries to limit liability. Some who have left are Bridgestone, Colgate, Delta, GM, Kimberly-Clark, Mondelez, Pepsi-Cola, and United Airlines. In 2016, PDVSA secured a $1.5 billion loan from the Russian state-owned oil company Rosneft. PDVSA using 49.9% of shares in Citgo as collateral. Citgo is based in Texas and has large assets in the U.S. that include 3 oil refineries, 48 terminal facilities, and several pipelines. This presents a risk that Rosneft, the Russian state-owned oil company, could gain control of these assets in the U.S. while also threatening our energy security here in the U.S. The Cato Institute has a thing called the Economic Freedom of the World Report. It ranks 162 countries according to 42 indicators that are grouped in 5 broad areas of economic freedom. These 5 categories are size of government, legal system and property rights, sound money, freedom to trade internationally, and regulations with regards to credit, business, and labor. The higher and the scale is 1 to 10. So the higher the grade a country receives in the index, the freer their economy is. The lower the grade, the farther it is from being considered a free market. The 2018 list ranks Venezuela as number 162 out of 162. That's dead last, which means it is the least free economy in the entire world. Since 1999, these policies have led to a downfall of Venezuela, massive expropriation. Let me just. Now, just to mention, back to that scale of 1 to 10. In 1970, Venezuela was number 10 in the entire world. It was 10. And this put it behind Denmark and Germany, and it was ahead of Finland and Singapore. In 1975, it dropped to number 15, putting it ahead of Denmark and the United Kingdom and Australia. In 1980, it was number 13 behind Australia and Germany, but ahead of Finland and Ireland. It fell to number 30 in 1985 and number 53 in 1990, number 106 in 1995, number 88 in 2000, and then eventually it kept falling until it bottomed out at 162. In the 2 years leading up to August of 2018, over 2 million people, just in that 2-year time span, have fled the country as refugees to neighboring countries. As of 2017, 87% of families were living below the poverty line. 2/3 lost an average of 25 pounds in body weight in 2016. The Pharmaceutical Federation estimates that 80% of drugs are not available. Diseases like diphtheria, measles, malaria have come back from being eradicated. And also people that have had organ transplants are dying because they can't get their medications that they need to prevent rejection. Today, at least 60% of the population are dependent on government handouts, and that's just not sustainable. In 1976, the government nationalized the exploration, production, refining, and exporting of crude oil. The state-owned monopoly PDVSA, this company was nationalized, but it was ran efficiently because it was given autonomy from the government. However, when Chavez took over, he basically, in 2003, he basically completely took over that company. And then he fired over 18,000 employees and replaced them with unqualified people that were loyal to him. He used this company, the state-owned oil company, as his ATM machine to expand social programs. And he also used it to, as for construction of pet projects he wanted to do. The government tried to compensate for falling oil revenues by printing money. Like I said, that led to the hyperinflation. And one thing I want to mention, two former ministers from the Chavez government, Hector Navarro and a gentleman by the name of Jorge Giordani. So Hector Navarro and Jorge Giordani are former ministers of the Chavez government, and they basically say that they have, you know, evidence that shows that there's over $300 billion worth of the $1 trillion in oil revenue in the last decade that has disappeared. There's no accounting for it, meaning that over $300 billion in oil revenue money was stolen by the Chavez and Maduro governments. Navarro said a gang was created that was only interested in getting their hands on financial resources and the country's oil revenue. Navarro was a co-founder of the ruling Socialist Party and was expelled in 2014. In 2017, the Vice President Tariq El-Aissami had over $500 million in assets seized here in the United States through sanctions that include luxury homes and other hidden assets. Just think of all the assets he has in other countries as well. That was just here in the US, $500 million, and that was obviously stolen. Oil production in April of last year was 1.4 million barrels per day. In March of this year, it was half of that at 732,000 barrels per day. In the mid-2000s, Venezuela averaged 2.5 million barrels per day in production, and it reached a peak of 3 million in 2003. So the 700,000 barrels today is just nothing, and it's continuing to disintegrate, and they can't ramp it up because the whole infrastructure was neglected and led to fall apart. So anyways, that's my info on Venezuela.